There aren't many places that have the sprawling wetlands of Hwang, the majestic falls of Park Cataratas Victoria, and over 2,000 miles of pristine river all combined into one place. Yet all of this can be found in the continent of Zimbabwe. And despite its small land area, it contains some of the most fascinating and mesmerizing landscapes and wildlife you could ever have the privilege of encountering, including over 6,000 species of plants and over 12,000 species of animals. Herds of wildebeest, elephants and zebra galloping through the savannah, packs of wild dogs playing in the river, and prides of lions resting under the trees. And of course, we find some very menacing river giants. The Nile crocodile, whose reputation has become the stuff of nightmares, with their dragon-like appearance, powerful jaws, and the ability to stay hidden in knee-deep water. And then, of course, there is the real king of the river. Hippopotamus amphibius, the African hippo. After elephants and rhinoceroses, the hippopotamus is the next largest land mammal. It is also the largest extant land artiodactyl. Despite their physical resemblance to pigs and other terrestrial even-toed ungulates, the closest living relatives of the hippopotamids are cetaceans like whales and dolphins, from which they diverged about 55 million years ago. Hippos are recognizable for their barrel-shaped torsos, wide-opening mouths with large canine tusks, nearly hairless bodies, short legs, and large size. Adults average 3,300 pounds for males and 2,900 pounds for females. Their skeletal structures are graviportal, adapted to carrying their enormous weight, and their dense bones and low center of gravity allows them to sink and move along the bottom of the water. Their jaws are powered by huge masseter and digastric muscles, and the hinge is located far back enough so that they can open their mouths at 100 to 110 degrees. On the lower jaw, the incisors and canines grow continuously, the former reaching 16 inches, while the latter can grow to up to 20 inches. The lower canines are sharpened through contact with the smaller upper canines, which are mainly used for combat instead of feeding. Despite being semi-aquatic, an adult hippo is not a particularly good swimmer, nor can it float. It rarely enters deep water, but when it does, the animal moves by bouncing off the bottom, and an adult hippo surfaces every 4 to 6 minutes. Despite that they are mostly herbivorous, there are reports of meat-eating and even cannibalism and predation. On occasion, hippos have been filmed eating carrion, usually near the water. Their stomach anatomy lacks adaptations to carnivory, and meat-eating is likely caused by lack of nutrients or represents an abnormal behavior. As of such, hippos are usually calm towards humans and often never attack. But when they do, the results are the stuff of nightmares. Paul Templar was living his best life. He was 28 and conducting tours in his native Zimbabwe with a focus on photographic safaris. He had been away for a few years, including a stint in the British Army, but he had returned to Africa's bush country and fell back in love with it. The flora, the fauna, the great outdoors, the space made him feel at home. Templar said Zimbabwe's guide certification program was rigorous, and there was a lot of pride among the guides who passed. He reveled in showing tourists the area's majestic wildlife, including the water-loving, very territorial hippos. On March 9, 1996, Templar learned a good friend who was to lead a canoe safari down the Zambezi River had malaria. He agreed to take his pal's place. Paul loved that stretch of the river, as it was an area he knew like the back of his hand. The expedition consisted of 6 safari clients, including 4 Air France crew members and a couple from Germany, and 3 apprentice guides plus Templar. They had 3 canoes, clients in the first 2 seats, and a guide in the back. Then 1 apprentice guide was in a 1-person safety kayak, and down the famed Zambezi they went. Things were going the way they were supposed to go, as everyone was having a pretty good time. But eventually, they came across a pod of about a dozen hippos. That's not unexpected on the Zambezi, Africa's fourth longest river. They weren't alarmed at first, as they were at a safe distance. But they were getting closer, and Paul was trying to take evasive action. The idea was to just paddle safely around the hippos, with Templar's canoe leading the way and the other two canoes and kayak to follow. He pulled into a little channel waiting on the others. But the third canoe had fallen back from the group and was off the planned course. Templar was not quite sure how it happened. Just as he was about to assess the plan any further, there's this big thud, and he sees the back of the canoe catapulted up into the air. Evans, the guide in the back of the canoe, catapulted out of it. The clients managed to remain in the canoe somehow. Evans was in the water, and the current was washing him toward a mama hippo and her calf 490 feet away. In a panic, Templar knew he needed to get him out quickly. He doesn't have time to drop off his clients until it is too late. He yelled to Ben, one of the other guides, to retrieve the clients who were in the canoe that had been attacked. Ben got the clients to safety on a rock in the middle of the river that hippos couldn't climb. Meanwhile, Templar turned his canoe around to get Evans. The plan was to pull alongside him and pull him into Templar's canoe. Templar paddled towards him, getting closer, and saw a massive bow wave coming towards him. He described it as being like those old movies with a torpedo coming toward a ship. He knew it was either a hippo or a really large crocodile coming toward him. But he also knew that if he slapped the blade of his paddle on water, the sound would be really loud, and the percussion underwater seems to turn the animals away from his previous experiences. So he slapped the water, and the torpedo wave stopped. He was getting closer to Evans, but they were also getting closer to the female and calf. As Templar finally gets to Evans, he leans over and reaches a hand toward him. Evans reached up with his hand, their fingers almost touching. Suddenly, the water between them erupted like an underwater mine. It happened so fast, Templar didn't see a thing. What happened next was nightmarish and surreal. Templar's world went dark and strangely quiet. He said it took a few seconds to figure out what was going on. From the waist down, he could feel the water. He could feel he was wet in the river. But from the waist up, it was different. He was warm, and it wasn't wet like the river, but it wasn't dry either. And there was an incredible pressure on his lower back. He tried to move around, but he couldn't even budge. That's when he realized the horrifying truth. He was up to his waist, down a hippo's throat. Templar guessed he was wedged so far down its throat it must have been uncomfortable because he spat him out seconds later. He burst to the surface, sucked a lungful of fresh air, and came face to face with Evans, the guide who he was trying to rescue. Evans was in serious trouble. Templar started swimming back for him and was just moving in for a classic lifesaver's hold when out of nowhere he got hit from below. Once again, he was up to his waist, down the hippo's throat. But this time his legs were trapped, but his hands were free. He tried to go for his gun, but he was being thrashed around so much he couldn't grab it. The hippo, which turned out to be an older, aggressive male, spat Templar out a second time. This time, when he came to the surface, he looked around to realize there's no sign of Evans. Templar assumed Evans had been rescued, and he tried to escape himself. He started to swim back to shore and was making pretty good progress, but as he came up for the stroke and swimming freestyle, he looked under his arm, and until his dying day, he'll never forget this. Another massive hippo charging in towards him with his mouth wide open bearing in before he scores a direct hit. This time, Templar was sideways in the hippo's mouth, legs dangling out one side of the mouth, shoulders and head on the other side of its mouth. And then the hippo went berserk. When hippos are fighting, they try to tear and destroy whatever it is they are attacking, which is what this hippo was doing to Templar. So when he'd go underwater, he would hold his breath. When he was on the surface, he would take a deep breath and would try to hold on to the tusks that were boring through him to stop from being ripped apart. Templar said one of the clients watching the horror later described it like a vicious dog trying to rip apart a rag doll. He figures the whole attack took about 3.5 minutes. Meanwhile, apprentice guide Mac in the safety kayak, showing incredible bravery, risking his life to save Templar. He pulled his boat inches from his face, and Templar managed to grab a handle on the kayak. Mac dragged him to the relative safety of a rock. The expedition was still in one hell of a mess, though. Templar asked Mac where Evans was. Mac said, "He's gone, man. He's just gone." Templar knew he needed to come up with a plan to get them off the rock and to the riverbank. He assessed the situation. One man was missing. The first aid kit, radio, and gun all gone. 6 scared clients, 2 canoes, and 1 paddle left, and his own body was shattered. Templar's left foot was especially bad. It looked as if someone had tried to beat a hole through it with a hammer. He couldn't move his arms. One arm from elbow down was crushed to a pulp. Blood was bubbling out of his mouth. They realized his lung was punctured. Mac rolled Templar over and could see a gaping hole in his back and plugged it with saran wrap from a plate of snacks. Templar made the call. No matter the risk, they had to get off that rock. He was loaded into a canoe. Ben paddled. The Hippo kept bumping the canoe. He went from being terrified to calm on that ride back. He described a profound spiritual experience in which he had this incredible sense of peace and realization that this was his moment of choice. Ben and Templar made it out of the river, but without finding Evans. His body was found 3 days later. They concluded he had drowned because he didn't have any signs of animal attack on him. Templar states that Evans did nothing wrong. The fact that he died was purely a tragedy. Meanwhile, some people on shore had realized something was wrong in the river. A well-trained Zimbabwe rescue team was able to safely ferry everyone else off the rock. It took 8 hours to drive him to the nearest hospital. In a month's time, he had several major surgeries. He thought he would lose 1 leg and both arms. His surgeon didn't think he'd live. But not only did the surgeon save Templar's life, he saved his legs and 1 arm. The other arm, however, was beyond salvation. 2 years after that attack, Templar said that he and a team made the longest recorded descent of the Zambezi River to date. It took 3 months and covered 1,600 miles. Templar later moved to the United States, got married to the sister of a journalist on the record-setting Zambezi trip, wrote the book What's Left of Me, and is a speaker. Hippos do attack humans and are very dangerous. When it comes to these large river horses, there are about 500 human deaths per year in Africa. The number is shockingly large. In fact, hippos are known as the deadliest land mammal in the world. Generally, it's best to avoid hippos totally. If a hippo does happen to attack, the odds of living through it depend on whether you can get away or not. Sadly, if a hippo is able to grab you, the odds of escaping alive are slim. Hippos really only attack people who have entered into what they consider their territory. When you enter a hippo's territory in the water, things can turn nasty fast. They typically keep close to the shore in rivers and lakes, submerging themselves to keep cool. However, they will also patrol their territory, readily displacing trespassers. The most common hippo attacks come from the water, with humans on boats. Since hippos are submerged, it can be incredibly hard to see them from the surface. If a human floats by while fishing, it's easy to miss the massive animal at rest. Besides humans, hippos are known to attack lions, hyenas, and crocodiles. Lions and hyenas generally avoid hippos because of how easy it would be for a full-grown adult to kill them. Still, there are occasional instances where desperate lions and hyenas will find an isolated hippo and try to kill it. These encounters rarely result in success for the predators, as hippos are more than capable of defending themselves. No matter the case, Paul Templar was extremely lucky, and his experience is a reminder of the consequences when you are caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like, share, and subscribe for more on Wild Wisdom.